Hazel.
It's Azura.
And I'm Jermaine.
And welcome back to another episode of Clevities Hash Podcast.
So today we are going to have a very intimate discussion and we've got a special guest with us. Please welcome Miss Carrie Tan.
Woohoo!
You might know her as MP of Nee Soon GRC, but Carrie, you do so much more than that. Tell us more.
Well, it's been a pretty whirlwind past 10 years. I founded a women's charity called Daughters of Tomorrow. And 2020, I became an MP. And as of last year, I started transformative coaching to help people with their lives.
What's transformative coaching?
It's like you have a deep cleanse in your emotions and in your, spirit and soul inside out. Like you really get the stuff out that hasn't been looked at, hasn't been attended to, hasn't been processed. So you can understand it and you can understand yourself and you can choose what you would like to believe in that can take you forward into your life with none of the baggage that you weren't conscious that you had.
Right. Wow. So if people want to detox their body, they drink juice. Or if you want to detox your mind and soul, you go to Carrie.
Yes,
basically, right?
Yeah, that's kind of like how I would explain it. It's like a mind and soul detox.
Right.
I know a few people here who could benefit from that. We'll unpack
Like
that
who,
today.
Actually, every human being can benefit from that.
Yeah. So, this episode is coming out very near to Father's Day, and we also just celebrated Mother's Day last month, right? And I think when we were growing up, we all had different relationships with our parents. But because of those relationships, it really, builds character and it shows you who you are today.
For sure.
The good, the bad, the ugly. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And we've got Carrie here to help us along because she's got a lot of experience unpacking that part of her life as well. And I think, when it comes to especially being in an Asian household, like we all have some sort of things to say about our parents. Please, mom and dad, don't listen to this episode.
Or listen to this episode, you may actually benefit from it. And I'm sure Carrie has had many, what do you call your clients? Do you call them clients?
Clients, students, coaches.
Right, coaches coming to you with like issues they have had from their families or their relationships. And we can't wait to hear more about them. But first of all, how is your relationship like with your parents? If I may ask the floor very, very honestly.
Well, it was very tumultuous when I was younger, and it really only got much better when I hit my 31st year on earth.
You mean relationships can get better after so long being together with them?
Yeah, I think there are some things that happen to us in life that causes us to reflect on things, right? And I guess one of the big part of my daddy issue had to do with feeling like, because my dad's like very patriarchal, conservative, Teochew man. I was told from since young, like, oh, girls shouldn't do this, girls shouldn't do that.
Right.
And somehow the conversations happened at home that made me have this impression and believe in my mind that my dad, because he's Teochew, valued his face, not losing face, more than me. And that was this unconscious thing that I was fighting and grappling with, for a large part of my life until when I was 30, I got married. I think this is actually public
Information.
I got married, and marriage didn't work out. And I think it was through that quite difficult incident and episode in my life that I got to see that for real and felt for real that my dad loved me more than anything.
Wow.
So circumstances in life can actually give you new perspective.
Exactly. And sometimes it's the pretty shitty, painful things that happen that is trying to tell us something.
Right, right.
But I would imagine that it wouldn't have healed overnight as well. It required a lot of work from maybe your end and your parents' end as well to sort of mend that.
That's really interesting, Azura. I realized that when we heal, or when I healed and continue to heal as a person, then the people around me also evolve. Because when we operate in this world, people respond to us and they're a reflection and mirror of what we have inside us. So when we come into any interaction with people feeling balanced and healed and whole and compassionate, then there's no negativity to bounce off and bounce back at us. So, well, it's a journey, but it starts with us taking ownership of our own healing.
You were telling us pre-recording that when you were young, You ran away from home?
It wasn't that young also.
Oh.
It's quite embarrassing, but I ran away from home in my 20s.
Oh, okay.
When I had the financial means to, and I
Right.
was working to be able to feed myself and find myself a place to stay. But I think the difficult teenage years had a very protracted runway until I felt like, hey, okay, now I'm making my own money. I can probably survive on my own.
So
Then I ran
rational.
away.
Most people run away from home with like no idea.
No plans.
Yeah, no plans after that. Did you go back home after that?
Well, actually, I've stayed out. I mean, like I've stayed on my own
Since running away from home.
since that. I mean, I still go back to my
Of
parents and
course.
I stay with them once in a while, but it's like staycation kind of thing, you know.
So what were you trying to escape when you left?
On hindsight, I realized that I was really trying to find my own space, to be my own person. But I really wanted to. It was a combination of, hey, can I be out there in this world on my own? It was like I wanted to challenge myself. And I think maybe feeling like someone is telling me how I should live my life. Well, I don't think my parents meant it that way.
For sure.
I'm
For
sure
sure.
they have the
We
best
all-
intentions at heart. It's just that the way they grew up and also, you know, what they have learned growing up, sometimes they can project that on us.
Right, and I feel like this is the case, especially so for Jeremy and myself as well. Our parents are very, very traditional,
Teochew that.
conservative Asian
Teochew that,
parents. Right, but so that's for Jermaine and myself. How would you say your relationship is like with your parents, Jeremy?
I think it's been through a lot of ups and downs. I've had to really understand, you know, why they are like that. Or because when I was growing up, it's not that I didn't receive love. It's that I think they don't know how to be emotionally available. They don't know how to communicate about those things. But never once did they show me they don't love me. Like, I'll give you an instance, you know, something that manifests in my life now, I realized from my childhood. So when I used to be really upset, I didn't know how to regulate my emotions. I would throw tantrums. And my parents would just lock me in my room for hours on end and just let me try to figure that out by myself. But I was young, like I had no idea what was going on. So now when I argue with my partner, I escape. I lock myself and like I don't let anyone in. And he finds that very frustrating because he likes to communicate about things. But that stemmed from how, you know, I was treated when I was young, pretty much.
I think that's really awesome that you arrived at having awareness of that. And,
Yeah.
you know, it's really interesting because from my interactions and sessions and understanding the stories of my clients, what we sometimes discover is that love comes and expresses itself in so many different ways and forms. And sometimes in families, it's not that there was any, you know, very overt abuse or anything, but love could be experienced when we are in our childhood as punishment or as people shouting at each other. And unconsciously, that's how we understand love. And in our adult years, we enter into our relationships, bringing that way of loving others into our lives.
Oh, so that's why I shout at my partner. Because I was from a shouting household.
Really?
Yeah, very noisy every day, screaming and shouting.
Okay.
Actually, that's funny because I'm slightly the opposite,
Oh?
of which I was screamed at a lot, and hence I don't scream, and I cannot have people screaming at me.
That's why I think it goes both ways. Either you really take after them or you are like Azura, the complete opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us
like
more. You were from a screaming household?
Not really. My mother was just very noisy. But I think maybe if you've been following, and especially like Hazel and Jermaine, they would know as well that I came from a single parent household where my dad disappeared to thin air at 6 when I was 6. And I never really got an answer for it because nobody actually sat me down to tell me what was going on. Yeah, so I sort of have to figure everything out myself. My relationship with my mother is very volatile, I would say, because for a long time at such an age when you don't really understand what was going on and things like that, it felt like she was all I had, right? And I really wanted to hold on to that. So at like 15, 16 kind of thing, you know, when she eventually found someone else, it made me feel like I was being, not say cast aside, because she was still
Abandoned.
there for me.
Right.
But it just felt like,
Someone else was in her life now.
yeah, and it felt like I wasn't getting that support that I needed. Like it wasn't just us anymore. And I think I had a lot of resentment out of that I sort of see and acknowledge and sort of am trying to cope with now as well.
So would you identify as someone with daddy issues? Sorry, I gotta ask the hard-hitting questions here.
I don't know if it's daddy issues. I would say I have mommy issues.
Oh.
Which is strange, right? Because I grew up with her, right? Daddy issues, I don't think it affected me very much. I think the only way my father has affected me was in a way where I am always ready for people to leave me.
That is daddy issues. It's interesting because I think there could be a common misconception that daddy issues or mommy issues stem from dad or mom not being around in our lives, but it may not be true at all. People could have daddy or mommy issues who, when maybe their dads or moms were around in their lives and in their face too much. So it's just a dynamic of the nature of interaction and what it causes us to feel, and whether we had anyone to process those feelings with when we were kids. And if we didn't, we form certain beliefs and perceptions that are just like unconscious and we don't realize they're there, right? And I think it's brilliant that Azura, you shared that you knew as a kid that your mom was all you had and you had this really strong attachment to her. Did it feel like when he was no longer in your lives, like it was just you and your mom against the world?
Yes. And it also felt like I had to step up because I saw her crumbling and I saw that she was trying to hide that from me. So I stepped up and sort of like shut everything else aside. I didn't have time to sort of like deal with my feelings because I had to put up a strong front. I couldn't be the kid who was asking where he was because that would hurt her. I couldn't be the kid who was, throwing tantrums because she had more than enough to deal with.
Sometimes when we end up being the kind of like adult in the relationship and we end up being there for our parent, it's almost like a child needing to feel security. And I've seen cases where the child stepped up to be the one for their parent as a way to gain that sense of security that, hey, I'm going to be here for mom and mom needs me, and hence I'm going to be secure. Because as children need security, love, food, protection, attention, and all these things. And they will find a way to be someone that can get this in a secure manner. And by being there for your mom and by feeling needed, that was your security blanket. And when suddenly someone showed up in her life and you're like, am I needed anymore? That just feels really, really scary.
But has your relationship with her improved over the years?
Now I would say it's a lot better. It took a lot. I think there was a period of time where I probably didn't speak to her for like a year, even though I was still living at home.
Because of the new relationship in her
Not
life?
really, but I think maybe it's a timing thing as well, right? Because having had to do that since I was a young child at 6, and then when I transformed into my teenage years, I think it sort of came out, and then that was the same time that she found someone as well, and so it was rebellion. It was a lot of just finding myself, a lot of I don't know where to turn to. So those years for me, I think, were very, very hard because of all that, right? It was happening at the same time. And I think for a while as well, especially when I was in my early 20s, I felt like, her love was very conditional, where if I did things right, she was there. If I didn't, she wasn't.
But if there's one thing I can say now is, as friends, I'm sure Jumi and I both can see that Azura, your mom still, of course, she loves you a lot. Every time she goes overseas, the mother will be there at the airport to see her off, hug her, take photos, say goodbye. The entire village will come down,
The
basically.
whole family will
The
come
whole
down.
family, and then me and Jimmy just standing by the side, and take photo, take photo.
There's literally a picture of me at the airport, her and her whole family. I'm just standing at the side with my luggage.
Exactly. So this is the kind of support that I think your family has shown you.
I'd like to share something that I discovered about how trauma works, right? Which is that when we have trauma, and trauma doesn't mean that you have had to have something very dramatic happen to you.
Right.
It's just any adverse experience that happens to you that has not been processed and tended to emotionally. It creates a certain effect on us. And what it creates also is a lens through which we see things. Whereas, because of certain adverse experiences that you had with your mom, it created a lens, and that lens could look something like, my mom doesn't care about me. Or like in my case, like my dad values not losing face more than me. And when we wear those lenses, it's like the sunglasses you have you just go about life and seeing everything with that lens on. And it's so clear as day to everybody else and your friends how much your mom loves you, but you will always, until you process that, see your mom's love as with those tinted lenses. And that is how trauma happens. Like, trauma makes us unable to see things objectively and see the fact in the present moment, because we're still living in the memory of that past.
I
That's a
think
very good
even
point.
identifying the trauma that you've been through, a lot of people don't realize as well, because you're not in touch with yourself. You don't sit and just think to yourself, "Oh, that was trauma."
Well, and exactly like you said, Jermaine, when our parents were not emotionally available to us, they didn't role model to us what being in touch and connected with our emotions is like. And when we are not aware of our emotions, we will not be able to trace back to what was the experience we had that gave us those emotions.
I think, yeah, that's a very good point. For a lot of Asian families like myself, I would term my relationship with my parents bittersweet. Bitter because sometimes I look at other families, my friends, they have such good relationships with their parents. They go out shopping together, they dine out together every week, and this is something that I would really love for myself as well. But sweet because sometimes I look at other families and I see like their parents are abusing them verbally or physically, and I'm just so thankful that my parents are not like that. But trust me, my parents are the typical Asian conservative kind of parents, who would always tell me, "Mei Mei, don't be wearing this kind of clothes."
Like this one
AKA
also
this
cannot?
one, like something like that.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
showing too much skin. So that was when I was growing up, and I would always tell them, I'm putting a jacket on, which I never did after I step out of the house, basically. But sometimes when I want to talk to them about certain things, even at this age, say if I'm seeing someone new, I would ask my dad, do you want to be introduced to this guy? And he would reply, "We'll see how next time." And this makes me feel like, does he not care? And I feel like this shuts me off from telling them other things that happens in my life next time, be it relationship or like otherwise.
Can I offer you a perspective on that? Because I had the same experience with my dad, because it's a bit of a review thing. Well, I had a few boyfriends along the way. And I felt exactly that, right? Like, how come dad doesn't want to meet these guys? And one day my dad said this to me. He said, "You're always changing boyfriends.
That's what he says to me.
Yeah, if I meet this guy now and he turns out not to be your husband, I would be doing your future husband a disservice." And it just blew my mind. I'm like, what? So somehow something about their upbringing, or at least my dad's upbringing, or something in him, he valued being like the only man in my mom's life. And I guess for him to give any acknowledgement to other guys in his daughter's life, he would feel like if he were the future husband, he would not like that or something. I don't know. So it's nothing to do with your dad not caring about you. It's just maybe he has something, his own hang up. You could ask him.
I am not going to ask him. Not for now, at least.
I'll send him the link to this.
But what I do know is there are 4 types of parenting.
Yes.
Right? And namely being permissive, authoritative, neglectful, and authoritarian.
Yeah.
So I don't know what kind of parenting styles our parents or our listeners' parents adopt, but here's a brief introduction on what these styles are all about. Permissive, child-driven, rarely gives or enforces rules, and overindulges child to avoid conflict.
So someone that, just gives you whatever that you want. It's the complete opposite of authoritarian, where, it's super strict. It's all about rules, and there is no communication. It's one-way communication. It's like, I command you to do this, something
It's
like
my
that.
way or the highway.
Yeah, and neglectful, I think that one is a bit more, serious, where they're absent or they are uninvolved. They don't really provide you nurture or guidance that you need as a child to navigate this world. Yeah, but
And-
the best one of all,
Right. I feel like this is the best.
authoritative. Yeah.
Solves problems together with the child, sets clear rules and expectations, and there's open communication between parent and child. I feel like this is the way to go. But of course, a successful parent would know when to adopt which kind of like parenting style under different circumstances. So are there some stories you can share with us from some of your coachees or like your students who have had maybe issues stemming from different parenting styles?
Well, there is someone who grew up, seeking to be very perfect. I guess as a child, she would get caned or punished whenever she didn't do in a certain manner well in her studies, and she felt like the way to win her mother's approval is to constantly be the best, or to have like really good performance in school, really good performance at work. I don't know whether you work with people who are perfectionists, and sometimes they can stress themselves out a lot and maybe stress out their colleagues as well. So some of these ways that, or the dynamics of how we've interacted with our parents to try to meet the expectations or to win the approval of our parents creates a certain persona or coping mechanism in us that we carry through that may not serve us at some point. And the interesting thing is, the same coping mechanism also managed to get us quite far. Like you can imagine a child trying to be perfect, would do really well in life, right? But they're constantly also under stress and anxiety from what if I'm not that good anymore. And that sense of the self-worth resting on performance and competency at the job or the task and all that can be very debilitating for people.
I think it's interesting that you bring up, caning as punishment, because it happens to, most of us. I don't know if you guys got caned when you were young. I certainly did.
When I was naughty, yeah.
Yeah,
Or when
yeah.
my siblings were naughty, then
So-
I kena cane also.
When I become a parent, right, I've spoken to my partner about this. I will never hit my child. I'll never slap my child. I will never, because I think it normalizes in them that it's okay to accept abuse from an authoritative figure. And that could manifest in different ways in their lives. But I want to know, like, what you guys think.
Definitely no physical abuse for me. But that was because my parents didn't do it very often to me either. Like, they didn't hit us if I didn't perform well in school. Maybe sometimes if I got really naughty, then they would take out the cane and like just whip it in front of me just to scare me.
Oh, just like this.
Yeah, but sometimes will really cane me. I remember
Yeah.
got one time I cried super badly, but it's not often. And I felt that looking back, well, maybe it was right of them to induce some fear in me so I would not repeat this mistake next time. I don't know.
It's interesting because a whole generation of parents got caned by the parents and then they
Right.
caned their children,
True.
right?
Yes.
And I guess the probably maybe a more balanced way to look at it is when a punishment is dealt out to a child, it needs to be debriefed after. And
Yes.
the punishment needs to be meted out in a very controlled manner where the child doesn't feel like, hey, the parent has lost it or is caning me out of
Anger.
and losing control of his or her own emotions, because that makes a child really, really frightened. Because a child depends on their parents to create order and control in the world, to make their world safe and certain. And when they see or experience the parents going out of control, it really messes them up. So if it's a punishment that is meant to inflict a little bit of pain so they remember the mistake, it has to be dealt with a lot of love and explanation after, so that the emotions of the child is held and processed properly, and they're not made to feel like, I'm so frightened because you just lost it.
Yeah.
How can I trust you to bring me up in this world? I mean, and this thought is not conscious in the child's mind, but it's unconsciously just running in the background in their psyche.
Right.
This is where I argue with my partner a lot, because when he was growing up, he belongs to authoritative, perfect parents. So his parents would say, okay, you did this wrong, you shouldn't have done it that way. This is why I'm giving you this punishment. Hit one time, that's it. He understands. That's why he thinks it's okay. But to me, I was never treated like that. I was hit till the hanger broke, stuff. And
Really?
Yeah. Then got to cry. My dad would drag me to my mom, say, you must go ask mommy put Zembak for you. I'm like, no, she just hit me. Why would I go to her? Things like that. So to me, I have a very averse reaction to that kind of punishment. But I see where he comes from. He came from a different kind of parenting style.
On this note, let's look at this example from a BBC article where this lady shared how her strict Asian parents made her awkward and lonely. So she grew up in a very strict household and with overprotective parents. If she was not home by her curfew time, which is 9 p.m., her parents would threaten to call the police.
Oh, we're all dead eh?
It's crazy, my goodness. So once she was at a work event and she didn't make it home on time because 9 p.m. is a bit early, right? Her parents were hounding her, texting her and all that. And her mom called her repeatedly. And when she finally picked up the phone, when she found a gap in between work to pick up the phone, the mother was wow, hysterical, screaming at her over the phone. And she felt like this made her really, really awkward and lonely. If you were in this situation, what would you girls have done?
Wow.
But she's already working. She's an adult.
The mom has stuff the mom hasn't processed, and it's just being, surfacing and being projected to people around her, and it's really unfortunate. I think it's really unfortunate, which goes back to my earlier point about how it's so important that we all take personal ownership of our own healing, so that we don't end up having our baggage translate or spill over to the people in our lives. And I think a mom must have really suffered something for her to have this extent of, if I may say, insecurity.
But it's so hard, right? Because you can only take charge of your own feelings, your own baggage, your own healing, but you can't make someone else do it, you know?
So, very
Actually,
interesting.
this happened to me. My father did the same thing to me. I was 14 years old, and at 11 p.m. I was out at some random McDonald's eating nuggets and fries with my friend. And my dad got so angry that I was not home by 11. He kept calling me. And I said I was out with my female friend. And he said, "Is it? You pass the phone to your female friend. I must listen to her voice before I believe you." And that made me very embarrassed. But okay, I did it. I passed the phone to her. She said, "Hi, uncle," and all of that. And after I went home, I actually sat my father down and I told him that, "Dad, what you did made me super, super paise or embarrassed. Can you please trust me and not do this the next time?" And that was the last time he ever did it, you know.
Wow.
Isn't
He
that
never did it
wonderful?
again.
Yeah. You know, this really answers your question, Azura. Like, you're perfectly right when we can only be aware and take charge of our own emotions. And sometimes what we really need to do is to just honor our feelings and communicate them gently to the other person. And most of the time, you'll be surprised, like, people would understand. I mean, how they choose to respond is theirs, but we can do our part by just being aware of how we feel and stating our stand and letting people know how we feel. Most of the time, people are just unaware that they're hurting someone.
Yeah, it's true. I think over the years, all of our relationships with our parents has changed. And as we grow up and we learn how to communicate as well, like communicating gently is the key word. You have to know how to phrase it and, say it in a nice way, right? For them to understand.
And I find that is an ongoing work, because you know what? Recently, I got to know about this term called gaslighting.
It's a very new age term.
I was just really mulling over this and trying to reflect, like, what is gaslighting? And I realized that for those of us who has been gaslighted while we were growing up all the way, we had no idea that this is gaslighting, and we have no idea that it was just what we went through in our childhood lah. Then it seemed normal. My parents didn't know they were doing anything, because probably they were being gaslighted by their own parents growing up too.
But how were you gaslighted by your parents?
If I understand gaslighting correctly, it means to say something that invalidates what somebody else is feeling. And you know what? When we were growing up, there were so many micro moments. Like, so for example, the other day I was at Gardens by the Bay and I saw this grandma feeding a little girl some McDonald's fries. And the girl stopped eating, right? She was like holding a fry and then she stopped eating. And then the grandma was asking her, "Hey, how come you're not eating?" And then the girl said, "Hot." And then the grandma said, "No lah, not hot lah." And then started pushing the fries in the kid's face, right? And I realized in that moment that this is invalidation in its most subtle moment. Like, a child is told that what she feels obviously is real, which is the fry is very hot for my tongue, which is not same kind of tongue like grandma has, because grandma's well worn with years, right, and very tough and all that. But we're being told that, no, you're wrong. And that makes us just doubt ourselves, like, because what we're feeling is not correct.
But let's take a look at the flip side, right? I don't know if you have any coachees that would come to you who have benefited from gentle parenting.
Or is gentle parenting
Yeah.
always a good thing?
Wow, my coaches I think, all grew up in that era where this term was
Not a thing.
not a thing.
Yeah.
But most of the time, the coaches don't come to me because they say, I I have issues with my parents. No, they are looking at, hey, I want to be better at my job. Hey, I want to make a career switch, and I feel very fearful. I don't have the courage to do it, and it's really through inquiring deep down into what are some of the beliefs that are holding them back in this moment that we unravel, like how those beliefs got there in the first place, and eventually you trace it down to it was some childhood experience.
Right. Because it's funny, because I see it coming out now, right, in different forms, especially when it comes to being doubtful, even when I know that, this is right. Or, even if you give me 10 people who tells me that, this is this and this is this. But I would always question myself again and say, oh, but maybe I did this to contribute to it. Oh, but maybe, I didn't do enough. And because of that, and because I'm always second guessing that way, I find it very hard to, make steps or make moves to sort of like change things, because I will always feel like I had my faults too, and hence I am not qualified, or, it is not my place to do something about it.
There's such a common thing that we, inadvertently, when we doubt ourselves, we end up holding ourselves back.
But a lot of females that I know feel like imposter syndrome. That's what I've seen, where they feel like even though they're in a position of power, they feel they don't deserve it, or to a certain extent. And I think that also stems from, in their childhood, what they were being put through. Yeah, so that does still manifest in these
There's
days.
some lenses that they're still carrying with them.
Precisely.
That makes them feel that way.
Yeah.
All right. To wrap up this episode, what do you think is important to maintain a good relationship for parents?
What I've seen work out really well for myself is to start seeing them as human beings, like they're individuals with their own lives, and they happen to be our parents. And that's a really important step, because then we stop expecting them to be a certain way that we want our parents to be, and to really see them as fellow human beings and have empathy for what were their experiences that made them behave and have beliefs in this manner and have these values. And that really helped me. I think the moment when I realized that my mom is a woman in her own right was when I was, I don't know, like 31.
Okay, so I still have time.
Yeah, it's good that you realize it sooner. And I think to take that lens and see that, we have the ability and the power to lead with empathy in our own relationships at home.
For sure.
And our parents didn't have the opportunity to have all these talks or be exposed to these things that gave them the opportunity to have self-awareness. But if we're more aware than them, then we can always be the one to lead that conversation with empathy.
Which leads to my point. I feel like open communication is very important. Maybe our parents are not so open in this aspect, but then it's maybe up to us as children to sit them down and have a talk with them. Knowing how they function, how they communicate, maybe we can angle the conversation in that way that would strike the right chord with them. I think that's very, very crucial.
I think sometimes because, growing up, you feel like they are your moral compass, right? That, that is what you're supposed to be. That is the person that is sort of guiding you in this world. You sort of like have over expectations for them. But I think it's also important to remember that, they were parents for the first time as well, and they weren't given a manual. There's no guide for them on how to be parents. But, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be like difficulties or, misunderstandings. But yeah, I think it's, seeing that as well.
I found that the best way to improve the relationship we have with our parents, or at least what I've been doing, is to accept them.
It's true.
Easier said than done. It sounds very simple.
It's a journey.
It's so hard to execute.
And there's no saying we're going to be perfect parents. I think, I'm sorry to our future kids.
Oh my God.
We'll try.
We have trauma. But I like to take the extreme side, where if you are in a dangerous situation at home, you're in a very, very volatile, violent situation, just because they are your family doesn't mean that you internalize that and treat it as okay. I think sometimes you got to create the family that you deserve outside of your blood family. Yeah.
That brings to mind, Jermaine, how sometimes I have residents who come to me and they may write me an email or come to me and say that they don't know how to help their friend who is in an abusive relationship or in an abusive household. I think it's important to recognize that when someone has grown up with violence all their lives, they don't necessarily see it as danger or wrong. That's just what's normal for them. And for someone else who is looking at the situation to say, hey, you need to step away from that and get yourself to safety, it's a very big chasm they have to cross, because what they knew to be their family was safety. And violence was part of that familiarity that they had. So it's really, really important that we give space and we help them to feel that there is another safe space that they can go to.
Well, with that, thank you so much, Carrie. I think we've benefited so much from this episode alone. Thank you. And you know what? I think Harsh, Clarity is a safe space as well. If you have any thoughts on your mind at all, feel free to always drop us a DM on Instagram at itsclarity.co.
That's right. And of course, make sure that you follow us on Me Listen, Spotify, Apple Podcasts to know when the next episode drops.
You can leave a comment, subscribe to us, turn on the notifications. Yeah, let us know what you want to see more of.
Thank you so much once again for listening. I'm Hazel.
I'm Azura.
I'm Jermaine, and
I'm Carrie.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Clarity's Hush Podcast.
hey, she did it.
Till next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Have you come across women whose bosses want to promote them, and the woman's like, no, I'm not ready for this. I don't think I can do a good job. Oh, it's not happening in your
My boss
generation
want to
anymore.
promote me. Oh, I will take it and
Let's
run.
go. Let's
Oh, this is really good to hear. That's great to hear. Okay, maybe my generation.